join today. And you can, of course, have a look at the slides and the presentations afterwards once again. So once again, welcome. This webinar is actually organized as part of a webinar series. We're talking today about artificial intelligence applied to health. We're glad to have three renowned speakers who will support us here in this webinar. Let me first very quickly introduce you the process. So we will have several speeches, then we will have a guided discussion where we'll be happy also to answer questions from the audience. If you have any of those questions, please make sure to put them in the chat during the presentation so we will be able to take them up afterwards. And of course, if there are any questions that cannot be answered during the webinar, we will make sure to answer them in a follow-up emailing, where we'll also share the slides that are presented today. So very quickly, the agenda we are looking at today, I will very quickly introduce you to the SENET and to the IDIH projects, just to give you the frame. And then we will have a presentation from Dr. Nicole Wheeler, who is joining us from the Center of Genomic Pathogen Surveillance from the Wellcome Sanger Institute in the UK. We will then have Professor Xiao Li from the Institute of Computing Technology of the Chinese Academy of Science in China. And the third presenter is Dr. Aso, who is working at Novuscare Ltd and the National Institute of Advanced Industrial Science and Technology in Japan. So very glad to have these three speakers from three different regions and countries, and we hope they will give us a very nice overview of artificial intelligence applied to health in different aspects. And then after these presentations, we will have a moderated exchange where we, as I said, will answer questions also from the audience. So now very quickly about the SENET project. SENET is actually a collaborative project financed by the European Commission. It's called the Sino-European Health Networking Hub because we try to organize collaboration between Europe and China in the field of health and bring together researchers and innovators from these two regions countries to increase the participation in collaborative projects. So we're glad that this webinar is part of the webinar web series. There were other ones upcoming in January, so please make sure to connect to our website. Here you see the link also, especially to the site of the website series, where you will be able to find the registration to the upcoming ones. And of course, make sure to follow us on social media, not only today during the webinar, but also afterwards. We have Twitter and LinkedIn account. Now about the IDIH project. IDIH is actually the abbreviation of International Digital Health Cooperation for Preventive, Integrated, Independent and Inclusive Living. It is a collaborative project, also co-financed by the European Commission. Collaboration between Europe on one hand and several strategic countries, which are Canada, the USA, China, South Korea and Japan in the field of e-health. And we try here to set up a collaborative approach through expert groups who support us in the aim of setting up a roadmap for active and healthy aging through innovation all across the world, I might say. Here again, please check out the website, idihglobal.eu, and follow the project on Twitter and LinkedIn. I have now the pleasure to announce our first speaker, who is Dr. Nicole Wheeler. And whilst Dr. Wheeler, you set up your slides, let me shortly introduce you to the audience. So Dr. Nicole Wheeler is a data scientist at the Center for Genomic Pathogen Surveillance at the Wellcome Sanger Institute in the UK. Her focus is on developing high-throughput computational methods for understanding adaptation in bacterial pathogens and flagging high-risk strains. She combines background in biochemistry and genetics with experience in statistics and machine learning to find new ways to gain insight from genome sequence data. Dr. Wheeler will give us a presentation on artificial intelligence for pathogen surveillance. promise and pitfalls. Dr. Wheeler, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, and thanks to the organisers for inviting me to speak at this event. Yeah, I'm Nicole Wheeler. I work as a data scientist and bioinformatician, and I'll be giving a brief overview of some of my work in machine learning for pathogen surveillance over the last few years. So my work really centres around studying infectious diseases, which I think is a very exciting and dynamic area to work in, partly because, as we've definitely seen this year, infectious diseases can behave really unpredictably. They can move and spread internationally before we even recognise them as a problem. They can adapt over time in response to our attempts to control them. And we're seeing across a lot of different infectious diseases that resistance to treatment is a growing problem. And perhaps underappreciated is the fact that infectious diseases don't just impact us through outbreaks and pandemics, but also through their fundamental effects on how we practice modern medicine. So a lot of real advances, such as safer childbirth, invasive surgeries, and chemotherapy, really strongly rely on our ability to prevent infections. So my job has been to figure out how machine learning or artificial intelligence might fit in with pathogen surveillance. And some of the things that we've been looking at are detecting or forecasting outbreaks using routine surveillance data, spatiotemporal modeling of antimicrobial resistance to better inform policy decisions and to model the outcomes of different interventions. And also for a given sample that might show up in a clinic or in the food chain or at a border, improving our ability to predict that sample's resistance to antibiotics and the sample's ability to cause severe disease. So in this presentation, I'll just be focusing on those last two. So the general field of machine learning and bacterial genomics, which I'll be talking about today, has really seen a big uptick in interest over the last couple of years in terms of the number of papers and citations. Most of these papers are around predicting antibiotic resistance, because it's a really important trait, and it tends to have a relatively simple genetic basis compared to other things we might be interested in. But because interest is relatively new in this area, there's still very little consensus on the best practices for training and testing and reporting on these types of algorithms. So one of the questions I'm really interested in is how well do these machine learning algorithms that we are developing predict antibiotic resistance when exposed to new data, the kind of data you might come across in a clinic or in a national surveillance program. I think this is a particularly pressing question when we think about infectious disease, because most of the burden of infectious diseases is in low-income countries, but most of the data that we collect to train machine learning algorithms is coming from high-income countries, and we don't really know how well that data maps across these different locations. So I guess another reason for concern is that of the countries where we do have a lot of data, algorithms trained on samples from one country don't necessarily do well when they're challenged with data from another country. For example, this is a paper that was published relatively recently, which predicts, it's a machine learning algorithm that predicts resistance to a panel of antibiotics you might want to use in the clinic. It was trained on US data and tested on held out data from the same hospitals. And it looked really good. It was performing generally at above 90% accuracy. But after the paper was published and we tested it on a collection of samples from European hospitals, we found that the performance of the algorithm dropped quite dramatically to the point where it wouldn't have been a helpful diagnostic tool. And this raises the question of the type of testing we're using to evaluate these algorithms and whether it's really providing a realistic expectation of their performance out in the real world. So one of the things that I've been looking at is how we test these algorithms during development. In particular, looking at whether or not the algorithm is going to be robust when it encounters a new strain of an existing pathogen. We know around the world there are different strains of pathogens and they have different resistance profiles. And because infectious diseases can cross borders all the time, we want to know that if something new appears, the algorithm isn't going to be thrown. So one of the really simple ways you can look at this is just to take a family tree of the samples that you're looking at, cut it into subfamilies, and then train your algorithm on some families and test it on others to see what happens when it encounters new information. And there are plenty of algorithms that do just as well on familiar families as completely new families it hasn't seen before. But in this slide, I've shown an example of one where if you just randomly split these samples into training and testing, you can see in the purple dots, the algorithm looks very accurate. But in the green dots, you can see what happens if it's tested on a brand new strain. The performance drop can be pretty significant, which suggests that this algorithm isn't learning the full basis, the full biological basis of resistance in these strains. And it may well just be memorizing which strains it's seen in the past are resistant and which are sensitive. Another thing I'm very interested in looking at is complex traits. So antibiotic resistance can, in many cases, be caused by a small number of genes or mutations. So the signal that an algorithm needs to learn is relatively simple. But there are other traits in bacteria that are very important, that are controlled by a lot of genetic changes and a lot of genes, making them a complex trait. And a nice example of that is invasive infection in Salmonella. So different strains of Salmonella kind of sit along a continuum from ones that can infect a broad range of hosts and cause relatively mild infections like food poisoning. And then there are other strains that infect a relatively narrow range of hosts and cause really severe infections. The classic example being Salmonella typhi, which is restricted to infecting humans and it causes typhoid fever. So a lot of these invasive strains have evolved independently within the Salmonella family. And one thing that really unites them is their burden of deleted or disrupted genes. This is thought to be partly advantageous because the bacteria can shed functions that are damaging in the new lifestyle or might set off the host immune system. But it's also just a consequence of specialization. Adapting to infect a single host requires less functionality than living in a broad range of environments. So it looks like this loss of gene function could be something you could train an algorithm to detect. But when you look at the specific genes that are affected in the different invasive strains, you find that actually most of them are different, but they belong to the same functional pathways that suggests that selection is acting on the level of function, but it's not manifesting well in common changes at the DNA level. So to try to account for this, I developed a machine learning approach called Delta Bit Score, which basically screens across genes, looking at sequences that you find in nature to see what kinds of mutations occur often, suggesting they're well tolerated, and what kinds occur really quite rarely, suggesting that they're deleterious for the gene's function. I was able to apply this genome-wide screen to a collection of invasive and gastrointestinal Salmonella, and then feed that information into a random forest algorithm to get it to pick out a combination of genes that show this pattern of accumulated damaging mutations that allow us to distinguish between gastrointestinal and invasive strains. So I did an iterative feature selection process here where I ran multiple rounds of training and I threw out all the genes that either weren't used by the algorithm or weren't improving prediction accuracy much, till I got down to about 200 genes that provided 100% prediction accuracy on the original training data of these Salmonella. But of course, we wanted to make sure that this 100% accuracy on the training data also translated to accuracy on new families of Salmonella. So this is an example of one of the families that we looked at. We've got a map of the samples that we had available and a timeline of when they were collected, and a family tree up in the top right is probably the most important bit. So in all these views, the samples are coloured by the predicted invasiveness provided by this machine learning algorithm. And you can see in the tree, there's a really nice gradient from white at the bottom to red at the top. So we know we have a lot of epidemiological data on these samples, and we know that the white cluster down the bottom is found all over the world and is a common cause of food poisoning. Some of the red dots at the top are actually from a commercial rat poison. So it's a very invasive strain, so much so that that invasiveness has been commercialized. And then in the middle, there are two clusters that are sort of a darker pink color. One is predominantly found in West Africa, and the other is predominantly found in Central and Eastern Africa. And both are associated with a higher incidence of bloodstream infections than the white strains down the bottom. So what we see here in terms of what the algorithm has predicted lines up with what we see in terms of epidemiological data. So once this algorithm was published, we were able to actually apply it to a new strain that we didn't know as much about. So a strain was discovered in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in a surveillance study looking at children under 5 with bloodstream infections. So it was associated with a pretty severe infection outcome, but in a small number of children. So instead of collecting decades of epidemiological data, which requires a lot of people to have been infected, and usually relates to a strain that's managed to spread internationally at that stage, we applied lab techniques and genomic sequencing to try to assess the threat posed by the strain. So you can see in the plot the invasiveness index given by this machine learning algorithm to a number of different samples, including ones from lineage 2.1, which was the new one that we discovered. And this showed that in the genomic data, we knew lineage 2.1 was related to a number of other lineages that had appeared in the past that were associated with a higher risk of bloodstream infection. The algorithm actually showed a stepwise increase in invasiveness index in each of these new lineages, which have emerged about once a decade. In the laboratory as well, of the tests that we could apply that distinguish gastrointestinal and invasive strains, we also started to see a stepwise change from something that looks like a gastrointestinal pathogen to something that looks like a bloodstream pathogen. And unfortunately, we also saw that across these different lineages, there was a stepwise increase in antibiotic resistance mechanisms, to the point where now this new lineage is resistant to all antibiotics that can be used in the DRC except for one. So this is an example where machine learning can be applied amongst a suite of other tools to get a better idea of the risk posed by a strain before it has a chance to infect a lot of people. So to summarize, I think machine learning does show a lot of promise in bacterial genomics for predicting clinically important information. But we do have to be very careful about what these algorithms are learning and whether they perform well on new strains that they have never seen before, or if it seems like they're really only recognizing things that they've seen in the past. There's a lot more work that can be done in this area, particularly around including more biological knowledge in our modeling approaches and building more internationally balanced data sets, and also looking at implementing these tools for surveillance. So there's a little bit of talk around prospective trials. I don't know of any that have ethical approval yet, but we need to start developing these algorithms and then testing them to see if they keep performing well after we've published them. So that's all. I'd like to thank the organisers again for inviting me, and I would like to thank all of the people who have been involved in this work, particularly a PhD student, Ben Jeffrey, and the Centre for Genomic Pathogen Surveillance. And thanks to the audience for listening as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wheeler. A great presentation. I think it was highly interesting. Let me remind the audience that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will of course take them up in the moderator discussion right afterwards. Now I think we can move to our second presenter, Professor Xiao Li. Whilst you put up your slides, please, I will shortly introduce you. So Professor Xiao Li is an associate professor at the Institute of Computing Technology of the Chinese Academy of Science in China. He is working on the topics of healthcare, big data, and artificial intelligence in the medical field. Professor Xiao Li will give us a presentation about artificial intelligence for healthcare. And the short abstract about is, with the development of technology, artificial intelligence has performed more critical roles in the healthcare area. In this talk, he will introduce his research and representative works on molecular dynamics and medical image analysis, and will further talk about artificial intelligence in drug design and auxiliary diagnosis. Professor Xiao Li, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, thanks for the invitation. My name is Li Xiao. I'm from the Institute of Computing Technology, Chinese Academy of Science. Today, I will talk about AI for healthcare. So first, I will have some personal and team introduction, and I will talk about my representative works. And finally, I will discuss a little bit about the future trend for AI healthcare. So first, the person and team introduction. So my background. I graduated from Tsinghua University, and then I went to the US for a master and a PhD. My PhD is done in the University of California, Irvine in biomedical engineering. I'm now an associate professor in China, and I also the recipient of the 100 Talent Program in the Chinese Academy of Science. During my PhD, my research mostly focused on the modeling and simulation algorithm on molecular dynamic simulation, and especially we are in the Amber team, so which is the world's top software packages for the AMD. And my representative work during my PhD including two parts. The first part is a multi-resolution model with the implicit solvent. We achieved the biomolecular dynamic simulation with the implicit solvent, which builds the basis for large biomolecule long-time dynamic simulation. And the second work is the nonlinear PB system. We developed based on PB, we developed three innovative works on theory, algorithm, and application. And the nonlinear PB can achieve more accurate energy computation and dynamic simulation for charged biomolecules. And based on the algorithm, we developed the implicit solvent, implicit membrane binding energy correlation system, which achieves the state-of-the-art accuracy. When I come back to China, my research focuses on the intelligent medical treatment. We are focusing on develop the low-cost, high-precision automatic diagnosis system. And especially we focus on developing the methods on the deep learning joined with prior knowledge in medical, in which we have published 15 papers and supported by 3 million more projects. And our model includes the fine-grained classification, detection, and the prior knowledge-driven multitask segmentation. Based on the model, we develop the state-of-the-art, the clinical diagnosis system, which have been used in clinical. Especially, we developed the karyotyping analysis system, which has been used in the Peking University's third hospital and can save 2/3 of the time for doctors. And we developed the rapid diagnosis of stroke system, which has been stored in the Suining Central Hospital and can save 20 to 15 minutes per patient. And we also developed the breast cancer detection on mammogram system. And our products have some academic achievement. We won the 2019 National Medical Artificial Intelligence Innovation Award, and we also joined some competitions and won good prizes. Besides, I also do some academic services in the Chinese Association for AI. And my PhD advisor, Ri Luo, who is the founding team leader of Amber, and I'm currently with the Miracle Group, which is led by the IEEE fellow, Kevin Zhou, and we are focusing on the fields of medical imaging, robotics, and analytical computing. And I led a team of 8 persons with intelligence-aided diagnosis research. And secondly, I will talk about my representative works. So my first work is on the molecular dynamics simulation, which has been done my PhD. Before I introduce the idea, let me go with you some basic concepts. The different levels of abstraction to approximate the biomolecules. To model a biomolecule system, there are several ways. The finest way is the quantum description, which will capture the electronic structure in detail, but the computational cost is very high. The intermediate way is atom-based description, which can keep the atomic details. The finest way is the residue-based or coarse-grained description, which will capture the overall motion and properties of a biomolecule. And the continual description is widely used in modeling water or solvents. Well, then what is multi-resolution model? Multi-resolution model is to calculate material properties or system behavior on one level using information or models from different levels. On each level, particular approach are used for description of a system. For example, the famous QMM model, which couples the quantum mechanics to molecular mechanics. Actually, 2013 Nobel Prize of Chemistry is awarded to such kind of model. And another famous widely used model is the MMCM model, which couples the molecular mechanics to continuum mechanics. Actually, our model is one kind of MMCM model. For the MM part, we use the atom-based approach, which will define a classical force field. Every atom is represented as a classical particle, so the potential energy is additive, including bonds, angles, torsions, and atom pairs. And after defining the force field, we can use the Newtonian equation of motion to compute the new velocities and positions of the particles. For example, the microcanonical system, we can just simply compute the Hamiltonian, use the Hamiltonian to update the position and the velocity. And the continuum description is widely used in modeling water. In explicit solvent model, water molecules are represented explicitly. Since solvent typically accounts for 90 to 95% of atoms in explicit solvent simulation, which can be more accurate but computationally demanding. To deal with this issue, we propose the implicit solvent model. Solvent is treated as a continuum to capture the average solvation properties, and the solute is usually treated in atomic details, which can be much faster and more efficient. And based on the multi-resolution model, we develop the algorithm, and we use the Navier-Stokes equation to simulate the continuum solvent, and then incorporate the fluid mechanics algorithm with an alt-atom model to study the dynamics of the biomolecular systems. And this is the first achievement. We achieve the fluid dynamics algorithm, and we can successfully simulate the bubble merging dynamics. So here is the two bubble merging dynamics, and here is the three bubble merging dynamics. And next, we couple the molecular mechanics to the fluid mechanics and do an MDFT surface comparison with the explicit solvent model. You can see both the fluid dynamics implicit solvent model and the explicit solvent dynamics, they fit well on the boundary, which can give us an insight that the fluid dynamics algorithm can replace the traditional explicit solvent model. And my second representative work is when I come back to China, we develop a karyotyping analysis system for which can save 2/3 of the diagnosis time for doctors. The karyotyping analysis is a gold standard for prenatal diagnosis. We can use by detecting the abnormal chromosome number and structure, we can detect the genetic diseases. For example, the also test is usually diagnosed by the karyotyping. And the karyotyping including two major steps. The first step is counting, which we need to count the number of chromosomes in each karyotype image. For each patient, we need to count 20 to 100 images. And another one is the classification, which we will extract each chromosome in the image and determine their classes. And both of the two steps are very time consuming. So as a result, one doctor can only handle 10 cases per day per person. And especially the diagnosis needs professional knowledge to distinguish easily confused chromosomes, which further leads longer diagnosis time. So it is an urgent need to develop a computer-aided system to help doctor to improve the efficiency. So we develop an automatic diagnosis system, and we use the combined with deep learning to improve the prediction accuracy. The first key step is the chromosome enumeration, and we face a difficulty since there are many occlusion and similarly chromosomes, which will cause high misjudgment and misjudgment rate for the diagnosis system. It is easy to detect one chromosome as 2 or detect 2 chromosomes as 1. To deal with this issue, we use the geometric information to label chromosomes. We find the chromosomes are usually displayed as the banded type. So we develop 4 different templates according to the direction of the chromosome. For the highly banded chromosomes, we use a circle template to model them. So there we define the 5 templates and use the 5 templates to decouple overlapping and self-similar chromosome. With this method, we can raise the whole correction rate from 40% to 70%. And our results are published on the TMI, the top journal of medical image, and also supported by the NSFC grant. And the second key step is the chromosome classification. We face 2 challenges. The first challenge is small interclass discrepancy. As shown in the figure, the number 1 and number 2 chromosome in each figure is very similar. On the other hand, there are large intra-class distinction. For example, the left and the right figure, the chromosomes are displayed in very different features. So this will cause high classification error rate. We use 2 prior knowledge to improve the performance. The first prior knowledge is we know that autosomes are usually displayed in pairs. So paired cross autosomes in each figure usually have very similar features. So based on this, we develop a seamless network for paired classification to classify the chromosomes twice. For the first time, we detect the most confident chromosome in each class and use the feature vector of the chromosome to update the decision boundary to search for the next one. In this way, we can greatly reduce the batch effect. And the second knowledge is comes from the Denver system, which is proposed when people just getting to know the chromosome, and they simply divide the chromosome into 7 groups just according to their features, which means small interclass differences within groups. So with this prior knowledge, we develop a group in adjacent laws to put extra penalty on the interclass differences. And so in this way, we can further improve the accuracy. With these 2 methods, we can decrease the classification error by 20% more. Combined with the key models, we developed the first automatic analysis system for the whole process of karyotyping, which is collaborate with academician Jie Qiao. And we have the system has been installed in the Peking Third University Hospital, and with the help of the system, we can reduce the effect of we reduce the diagnosis time to from 30 to 50 minutes to 8 to 12 minutes, and the system can also improve the diagnosis accuracy. Right now, we are promoting this system. Then future trend of the AI healthcare. I think in the future years, AI will be will be rapidly developed in 2 areas. The first area is AI for medical image. I think more and more intelligent image-aided diagnosis product will be proposed and used in the market. This is because the Chinese government support in policies. Right now, the Chinese government have facilitated the process of the certificate approved. In 2020, there are 5 certificates of NMPA Class 3 medical device registration has been approved. I think in the future, and more certificates will be approved and go to the market. And the second one is the AI for drug discovery. Since in 2020, the rapid scientific development in this area, the Cell just published in the early year of this year, which use AI to discover the strongest antibiotic molecules. And my MIT Technology Review thinks this will be the 10 breakthrough technologies. Schrödinger has become the first drug discovery company for IPO, and also the AlphaFold 2, the 2 days ago, just achieved the results of protein structure prediction very similar to the real data, and also the increasing the market demand for it when is realized, especially with the happens of the 2019 non-COVID diseases. And within 2 weeks, in Chinese, the government announced the new use of old drugs. They have screened several drugs with curative effect on non-COVID. And also insulin medicine announced that they can discover the key anti-non-CAR proteins within 4 days. I think in the future years, this area can also will also be developed very fastly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Xiao. Very interesting presentation. Now, whilst Dr. Aso is uploading his slides, please, I'd like to introduce him to the audience. So Dr. Hitiki Aso is director at Novoscare Ltd. He's also principal research manager at the Artificial Intelligence Research Center of the National Institute of Advanced Industrial Science and Technology. That is one of the 3 major artificial intelligence labs in Japan. His research interest is in constructing intelligent systems that can learn from interactions with the environment, including humans. Dr. Aso will give us a presentation on the application of reinforcement learning to clinical record analysis. Dr. Aso, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for introduction and invitation to this conference. And I'm Hideki Aso from Novacare Limited and also from National Institute of Advanced Industrial Science and Technology in Japan. So today I'd like to talk about the application of reinforcement learning to clinical record analysis. So as you know, recently various novel sensing devices and medical examinations are developed, and the amount of medical data is continuously increasing, and also the rapid progress of machine learning and data mining techniques. So there are many applications of machine learning or data mining technique to medical data. For example, a medical image classification, as Professor Xu Liu told, and so it can make support the diagnosis, medical doctor side diagnosis, and also patient state prediction can be used to clinical decision support. But today I'd like to talk about a bit different approach to the medical record data using reinforcement learning. So this is a recently emerging area, I think. So medical treatment processes can be considered as an interaction between patients and doctors under uncertainty. So doctor observe a patient's status and execute some medical action. So such kind of interaction can be modeled by Markov decision process or partially observable Markov decision process, and in probabilistic modeling. And this is a figure of MDP. So in each time step, sorry. Patient is in some state, and doctor observe this state and do execute some action, medical treatment, and then the state of the patient change to next state. So, and they depend on the state, doctor get some reward. For example, a good state is a good, better reward. And so this is a very simple model of doctor and patient interaction, and we can specify this model by this state transition probability. So in some state, execute some action, then the next state, the probability of next state is here, and also reward probability. In some state, execute some action, and next state is ST, then doctor gets some reward in some probability. So MDP is composed of 4 elements: state space, the patient state space, and action space, doctor's action space, and state transition function. This is a state transition probability, and reward function, which is like expected reward. This defines the expected reward the doctor will get. And based on, and also we can introduce a doctor policy of agent, policy of doctor. So this defines action, doctor's action in some patient state. So this is this probability distribution of the doctor is taking some action. And with these elements, we can calculate the state value of a patient states. And this is expected cumulative discount reward in future. So if the state is in some state and doctor do execute actions sequentially in future, then patient state will change and doctor gets some reward in future. And so we can calculate the cumulative reward, expected cumulative reward for this patient under this policy of doctor. So then this is a state patient state value. And also we can calculate the action value. If the patient state is S and doctor take action A, then cumulative expected cumulative reward can be calculated, and this is an action value. And reinforcement learning is one of machine learning framework, and to find the optimal policy under this Markov decision process. So the reinforcement learning is a machine learning framework to find optimal policy through trial and error in the environment. So there are several techniques for reinforcement learning. So we applied this reinforcement learning to clinical record data in several years ago. So we use records of patients cared at the University of Tokyo Hospital for their heart diseases. And from that patient, we extracted patients with periodical visit. So, and we get 800 patients extracted, and minimum length is 25 visits around 2 years, and maximum length is over 100 visits over 10 years. So this is a dummy sample data of a patient, and a longitudinal axis is time, and around this area you can see the value output of the medical examination. This is a creatinine value, and this is a BNP. And around here, you can see the prescribed medicine or dosation of medicine. And each color corresponds to some type of medicine, and the width of the bar shows the amount of the dosage. And we focus on the process of controlling blood glucose level for type 2 diabetes patients. And so in that case, the patient state is directly related to the value of hemoglobin A1C examination. So if the HbA1c is lower than 6.0, the patient is in normal state, and between this area, the patient is in medium state, and up by 8.8, then the patient is in severe state. So this is a very simple discretization, but we used this very simple discretization. And also, in this case, action is a pharmaceutical treatment. So dosage of 7 types of medicine we considered. So this kind of medicine for medical treatment of diabetes patient. And also we consider combination of medicine. So this kind of a combination patterns. So in total, we considered 38 patterns of dosage of medicine. And the reward function, this is a very problematic, but we assume a very simple reward function. If patient state is normal, then the doctor get reward 1 and else get reward 0. So example of an episode is, so for one patient, so on this date, the patient state is medium and the doctor dosed the TDZ and the next state is medium. And this is copied here, and in the next visit, doctor dose this medicine, and the next state is this one, and doctor get reward, and etc. So this is on one episode for one patient. And so based on this modeling, we can calculate the action value of doctor. So for normal state patient, this graph shows a value of each action. So expected cumulative reward the doctor will get in future. So if take this action, this medicine, dosing this medicine, then the action value is like this. And so, and this graph is for severe state patient. So you can see the difference of the action values. So in severe patient, the combination of medicine gets a higher action value. There is such kind of tendency you can see in this graph. So you can evaluate the value of each action. So for example, the top 3 action value, actions with top 3 action value is for normal state patient, this simple dosation has a high action value. And for severe state patient, this kind of complex dosation has a high action value. And we can also calculate the patient state value under some policy. And this graph shows a state value for patient. This blue bar shows a normal state patient, the value of normal state, and the red bar shows a medium state, and the green bar shows severe state. So the normal state gets a higher state value. Is very natural, very intuitive, and this is based on doctor's policy. And we can apply the reinforcement learning to this model, and we can get optimal policy. So if take the optimal policy, the state value increase like this. But this is very, very primitive work, and so interpreting this result is, we should be very careful about in the interpretation of this result. So in summary, we applied reinforcement learning to clinical record data of diabetes patients, and we assume a very simple real function and evaluate state and action values. And complex action takes higher value in severe states than in normal state, and we can get also the optimal policy under the model and the reward function. And as I mentioned, this is very primitive, first step of this kind of approach. So we have many issues in this area. So for example, we should cleaning the noisy medical data, or we should treat missing data in the medical record data. And also the patient state representation is a big issue. And in our case, we use a very simple patient state representation directly related to hemoglobin A1C value. But in the normal case, there are many medical examinations, and also the patient has various attributes. So from this information, we should create a compact patient state representation. So in here here recently introducing patient state encoding with deep learning is proposed. So as an example, this research published in this year compared the 7 deep neural encoding method using data from septic patient in the MIMIC3. This is a public data set to form the representation of the patient state. These are the architecture of the 7 different neural network architecture. And other issues, for example, action set is also problematic, and how to define reward function is very difficult. And also the data is based on observational data, and so it's very biased. And usually in reinforcement learning agent learn trial and error, but in medical area, the trial and error is not allowed. So we should make some method to cover the problem. So somebody proposed an offline reinforcement learning technique. And we also apply the inverse reinforcement learning to find the reward function of doctor in his mind. But this is not so good at that time. The result was not so good. And I think in this area, we have many opportunity for international collaboration. And for example, analysis of regional differences or transfer learning or federated learning scheme can be applied to enhance analysis in each region without sharing data. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aso. Very interesting presentation. Thanks a lot for having shared that with us. Now we would come to the moderated discussion, and I'm glad to introduce Dr. Sonia Ranand, who is one of our project partners in the SENET project, and who will guide us through the discussion. She is project manager in charge of international and scientific affairs at the Center for Genomic Regulation in Spain. Sonia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's not really the floor because I want to get some discussion going, putting again the speakers on the floor. But thank you very much, Eva, for the kind introduction. If the speakers feel like and wish they can put their cameras back on. Thank you, Nicole, for doing so. It's always nice to look at faces, even though we are all virtual. So maybe you have seen it. We had in the chat already quite some discussion going on, especially for the first talk. So Dr. Wheeler, Nicole, I say Nicole because we had some exchange already before. She was so kind to already answer them. I just want to highlight maybe the topic of the questions which were discussed here. It's about, there was a question by Angel Bernard about saying that the machine learning algorithms, they are always only as good as the training set is, and this is a real issue, right? And Nicole Wheeler was commenting that this is true, and it's really important to cover especially samples from different countries, from different regions, so to have algorithms working for different countries, for different societies, right? And this is about countries, it's about the different sex, could be about different age and so on, which is really important in genomic stature and which is currently heavily discussed. And Dr. Wheeler was also commenting on an initiative. It's called Global Health Research Unit, and the aim is to set up genomic and antibiotic resistance surveillance in 4 low and middle income countries, because this is the issue, right? That genomic data are often available from high income countries, but the algorithms would need to be applied as well on low income countries. So thank you for clarifying this. I don't know, Nicole, if you want to add something on this to share with the participants.
Yeah, I think I provided the example of the Global Health Research Unit for genomic surveillance because it's one I've had personal experience with, but I think there is a growing recognition that there's a huge amount of value that can come from genomic data in public health and surveillance. And if that data is collected in the right way, it can then be used to build models like the ones I've been talking about, or even just to better understand the link between genetics and traits like resistance. So I think to have that capacity set up in a sustainable way in middle and low income countries, it can take a lot of work and a substantial investment, but I believe that in the future, it can give really high returns.
Okay, thank you very much. Just out of curiosity, because we have today speakers also from China and from Japan, do you know if the 2 countries are involved in these efforts to call? I mean, I know it's not low income countries, but still it would be important to cover probably any kind of the region in the world. So do
this is one initiative of many. So China and Japan are not involved in this particular one because it was built off some key relationships with stakeholders that we knew would result in quite a big change in surveillance in these middle and low income countries. But there are, I think, a lot of other initiatives at the moment looking at gathering more balanced data, having better international links and coordination.
Yeah.
And so while they're not involved in this initiative, there are a lot of others.
Yeah, I can see quite some challenges in coordinating the availability of those data. Thank you. And then there was a question for Professor Lee from Timo Strohecke. So he's saying, out of curiosity, what was the maximum time scale of your MD simulations?
I think for like the typical like lab right now with the state-of-the-art GPU, like they can achieve like 1 microsecond per week, and in some large institute they can achieve like 1 millisecond, but the simulation probably takes like months, several months. The simulation time. It really depends on the computational power of the GPU and how much time you run the MD.
Okay. Thank you. Timo was also saying thank you. Great. I was wondering for your presentation about the karyotype analysis. I was not sure if you mentioned if it is already applied in the clinic. Is it already used?
Yeah, it is already used in the clinic in the Peking University Hospital, and we are trying into promoting this system.
So it's like on a normal basis, or are these pilot projects?
What?
So the application, if this already standard, or is it more like pilot projects, like the first projects to evaluate if it's supporting the work of the doctors?
It's supporting the work of doctors.
Okay.
Yeah, it cannot go beyond the doctor, of course.
Okay, and is this is only running in China, or is it already also in other countries?
It's just running in China, and we are now like still like improve it when during the usage in clinical. With more and more data goes in, and the system is keep on improving.
Okay.
And
okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
So then, so the last presenter was Dr. Asso. I don't know, we don't have a question yet in the chat because it was the last presentation. Does anybody has a question? You could also speak up and directly ask now if you want. In the meanwhile, maybe I can ask a question. So you were talking about that it's the first step. So you still need to validate a lot the data. But again, here my question, because we are here a bit talking about the different countries and collaborations. I guess the blood level data, they might be different in in people from different countries. And if you are planning to validate your algorithms also in people from other areas in Europe, for example.
Yeah. No. So currently, I don't have a plan, but it's a promising way to clarify the difference of the area, and it's very interesting research theme, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, also because recently, since a few years, there's a lot of focus on personalized medicine. And I wonder if this is an aspect in your research, because you said there are these three categorization, right? Normal, medium, and severe. And you were commenting that this is
too simple. Yeah, too simple.
Probably
so if you
simple.
categorize a patient, if we can categorize a patient in some types, then you can apply reinforcement learning to find the personalized or categorized treatment. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. We have another question in the chat to Dr. Zhao Li, I think. As you have been working in the US, have you set up any research collaborations in the US, which you continue collaborate with?
Yeah, we are now continue to developing the new MD method. I collaborate with my advisor Rilo within US. And but for medical image, we usually collaborate with the hospitals in China. So because the US, I think if we collect data from US, maybe it can be much harder. So we just collaborate with local hospitals.
Yeah, so but this maybe is a good comment to ask a third question here on our slide. So what would help you to work more in collaboration with other countries, for example, in the US? So you say it's hard to get data from
data,
the US.
Yeah, from the US. So usually, because when you get the data in China, then you can also not share with a partner in the US in other countries. So that's why, like this, for doing medical image analysis, we usually just collaborate in the hospitals in China.
So you mean this is the restriction regarding data sharing, protecting the personal data from patients, so that this is a very important restriction to protect the patients. But I understand this is a restriction for you, for your work.
It is likely to cause some issues if you share some data with the other countries' person, or get some other countries' data from to come to China to analysis. So to avoid this, which I think is the most simple way, is just collaborate with the partner in China.
Is there to all the three speakers, is there anything you can think of what is not easy in your country? So I understand some things, collecting patient data is probably something you do more local. Is there anything you feel you are missing and you see or you would hope you could benefit from in an international collaboration?
I think some pure research or some MD, for example, like AlphaFold. Like they can do the protein design, like they have very advanced technologies, like this area, like for molecular dynamics and drug design, we can have more collaboration with other countries.
Okay.
I think.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. I took note of these three important things.
Thanks.
I think Dr. Wheeler made clear that the collaboration here is about data sharing, but these are not. Professor Aso.
Data sharing the most difficult problem. Even in Japan, the data are fragmented in many hospitals, and so in machine learning area, we some research investigating the like method like a federated learning. So it's using the framework, many hospitals can collaborate without sharing the data to make a good, for example, prediction or good classification. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just to exchange a parameter of the trained model, not the raw data. Yeah.
Okay. Nicole Wheeler, do you want to add anything on this?
Yeah, I think we've already talked about the importance of data sharing, but particularly in infectious diseases, if you're interested in looking for new emerging pathogens and you're looking within the UK, you don't find a lot.
Yes.
Whereas, for instance, a lot of the work in Salmonella, the really interesting, troubling new strains tend to emerge in Africa because you've got more of a burden of comorbidities that make people more vulnerable. And so I think if you really want to understand infectious disease, you're really limiting yourself by just working in one country.
Yes.
And I think on top of that, there are different regulations and different approaches to sharing data and innovating. So I know we've got one collaboration with Australia that involves a huge amount of sharing of longitudinal patient data and trialing things in healthcare that I think would have been a lot harder to arrange in the UK. But just because of the way Australia's data collection is set up, it's a much faster environment to do research and development in this particular application.
Okay, very interesting. Actually, this is what a question I had in mind when you showed the map from where you collect epidemiological data. How do you do that? So it's all through collaborations, or how do you manage? Because in the end, you manage to share data. I understand it's not personal data because it's epidemiological, but still, how do you get the data?
I think working with bacteria is really nice because you can share genome data without the same expectation of privacy for the bacteria for the patients. So a lot of those are actually just big studies run out of the Sanger Institute that were sort of major collaborations, like one big paper that gave us a huge amount of information to work with. Yeah, so it's usually a couple of really big deals and a big budget sequencing project, and that's what you work with for a very long time afterwards.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have two very big questions from my colleague Eva, and we have 4 minutes left. So maybe I choose one, and we do a final turnaround of the speakers. So if all 3 speakers could comment or a short insight about the state of artificial intelligence research and application in the EU, China, and Japan. So what are major technologies, or do you see specific challenges? Just pick the things which you are aware of, which is maybe relevant for your research, or what is also relevant more in general for AI research and application in health. Is there anything you can say specifically for Europe, Nicole, where you see this is we are not advancing, or this is maybe a specific strength, what's happening in the UK or in Europe? Is there anything?
Yeah, I think what I've seen in the UK, there's a definite interest in using AI in health. And so there are new government bodies set up to try to develop AI in that space. There are new acceleration funds to try and prototype products. Historically, I think it's been really hard to fundamentally change how healthcare is done in the UK. A lot changed in a very short period of time when COVID arrived, particularly in terms of digital health. And people are very optimistic about that. But I think there's sort of 2 ways of looking at it. One is that, oh, they've adopted all these digital technologies and everyone's very happy and maybe this will carry on. But I think there are a few kind of privacy issues and implementation issues that were rushed through. So some people are also worried that there might be a bit of a backlash and a pulling back on digital health. So I think translating, you know, early stage research funding, which there's a lot of interest in, to actual change to patient care is slow and hard. But given the possible impacts on patients if we don't do a good job, I think it's slow and difficult for a reason.
Okay, thank you very much. So there is a push from government side, but there's the need for legislation, I guess, for a safe application of AI to clinical application. Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Aso, for Japan, can you give us a quick overview, just like what are recent developments? Is it supported by the government? Is it picked up?
Japanese, actually, the Japanese government also considered the digital health is a very important area, and so they're making many projects, and also I think that the AI is kind of advanced IT, so it's a very infrastructure of a society, future society. So Japan is promoting the society 5.0. It's a society based on AI technology or IoT or such kind of new technologies. So I think AI applied to healthcare, it will become very popular in Japan in near future, I hope. But in Japan, actually, roughly speaking, the US and China is very advanced in this area, I think. So we should work very hard.
We have to catch up. So we have Professor Li from China. So you were already having a few slides, I think, in your presentation about how China is supporting artificial intelligence. Do you want to give a final comment on this?
Yes, because like China put a lot of efforts on supporting the government, the artificial intelligence in the healthcare. The first policy level, like there are many policies to put the intelligence medicine in the document. So, and there are a lot of government funding supported this. Right now, a lot of data centers are built to collecting the private patient data and to facilitate the study and doing research on it. And also they speed up the process of the certificates for the NMPA class 3, like which so for each like medical devices, they can be only after they get the certificates, they can use the inpatient and charges on them. So in China, like they have already approved 7 to 8 such certificates, which it's much more than other countries. So I think they put a lot of efforts on this. And in the future, there will be more and more like support on this, because the Chinese government aware we should use AI to improve the whole area of the medical. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. This was a speech round. It was super interesting for me, and I think for my colleagues and all the participants. Thank you so much for the presentations and sharing your experiences here. Eva, do you want to have the final word?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sonia. Thanks a lot, especially to our experts, of course, having joined us from all over the world. So that was really great. I just wanted to make sure that all the participants also know that we will definitely follow up on this. So we will share the slides, we will share the recorded versions. We had some questions on that in the chat. And also, especially, I wanted to mention that if you're interested in exchanging further with the speakers, or also, of course, with other persons from the audience, we will make sure that there's a follow-up. So that could possibly trigger some collaboration on international level. So just to make sure you just drop us an email and we will connect you to the relevant persons. Thanks a lot again to our 3 experts, to Sonia for the great discussion moderation, and to the whole audience for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Gut gemacht.
Hi, Isham. I kicked them out, everybody. So
Okay.
I saw you were waiting. Unfortunately, the team left already, but that's okay.
Okay. No. If you need to go, just
No,
go.
it's okay. Actually, we have the work package 2 meeting, I realized.